15. Graduation. Morrie died on a Saturday morning. His immediate family was with him in the house. Rob made it in from Tokyo. He got to kiss his father goodbye. And John was there, and of course Charlotte was there, and Charlotte's cousin Marcia, who'd written the poem that so moved Morrie at his unofficial memorial service, the poem that likened him to a tender sequoia. They slept in shifts around his bed. Morrie had fallen into a coma 2 days after our final visit, and the doctor said he could go at any moment. Instead, he hung on through a tough afternoon, through a dark night. Finally, on the 4th of November, when those he loved had left the room just for a moment to grab coffee in the kitchen, the first time none of them were with him since the coma began, Morrie stopped breathing. And he was gone. I believe he died this way on purpose. I believe he wanted no chilling moments, no one to witness his last breath and be haunted by it, the way he had been haunted by his mother's death notice telegram or by his father's corpse in the city morgue. I believe he knew that he was in his own bed, that his books and his notes and his small hibiscus plant were nearby. He wanted to go serenely, and that is how he went. The funeral was held on a damp, windy morning. The grass was wet, and the sky was the color of milk. We stood by the hole in the earth, close enough to hear the pond water lapping against the edge and to see ducks shaking off their feathers. Although hundreds of people had wanted to attend, Charlotte kept this gathering small, just a few close friends and relatives. Rabbi Axelrod read a few poems. Morrie's brother, David, who still walked with a limp from his childhood polio, lifted the shovel and tossed dirt in the grave, as per tradition. At one point, when Morrie's ashes were placed into the ground, I glanced around the cemetery. Morrie was right. It was indeed a lovely spot. Trees and grass and a sloping hill. You talk, I'll listen, he had said. I tried doing that in my head, and to my happiness found that the imagined conversation felt almost natural. I looked down at my hands, saw my watch, and realized why. It was Tuesday. My father moved through days of we, singing each new leaf out of tree, and every child was sure that spring danced when she heard my father sing. A poem by E. E. Cummings read by Morrie's son Rob at the memorial service. I look back sometimes at the person I was before I rediscovered my old professor. I want to talk to that person. I want to tell him what to look out for, what mistakes to avoid. I want to tell him to be more open, to ignore the lure of advertised values, to pay attention when your loved ones are speaking as if it were the last time you might hear them. Mostly, I want to tell that person to get on an airplane and visit a gentle old man in West Newton, Massachusetts, sooner rather than later, before that old man gets sick and loses his ability to dance. I know I cannot do this. None of us can undo what we've done or relive a life already recorded. But if Professor Morris Schwartz taught me anything at all, it was this. There is no such thing as too late in life. He was changing until the day he said goodbye. Not long after Morrie's death, I reached my brother in Spain. We had a long talk. I told him I respected his distance and that all I wanted was to be in touch, in the present, not just the past, to hold him in my life as much as he could let me. You're my only brother, I said. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I had never said such a thing to him before. A few days later, I received a message on my fax machine. It was typed in the sprawling, poorly punctuated all-cap letters, fashion that always characterized my brother's words. Hi, I've joined the 90s, it began. He wrote a few little stories, what he'd been doing that week, a couple of jokes. At the end, he signed off this way. I have heartburn and diarrhea at the moment. Chat later? Sore tush. I laughed until there were tears in my eyes. This book was largely Morrie's idea. He called it our final thesis. Like the best of work projects, it brought us closer together, and Morrie was delighted when several publishers expressed interest, even though he died before meeting any of them. The advance money helped pay Morrie's enormous medical bills, and for that we were both grateful. The title, by the way, we came up with it one day in Morrie's office. He liked naming things. He had several ideas, but when I said, how about Tuesdays with Morrie, he smiled in an almost blushing way, and I knew that was it. After Morrie died, I went through boxes of old college material, and I discovered a final paper I had written for one of his classes. It was 20 years old now. On the front page were my penciled comments scribbled to Morrie, and beneath them were his comments scribbled back. Mine began, Dear Coach. His began, Dear Player. For some reason, each time I read that, I miss him more. Have you ever really had a teacher? One who saw you as a raw but precious thing, a jewel that, with wisdom, could be polished to a proud shine. If you are lucky enough to find your way to such teachers, you will always find your way back. Sometimes it is only in your head. Sometimes it is right alongside their beds. The last class of my old professor's life took place once a week in his home by a window in his study where he could watch a small hibiscus plant shed its pink flowers. The class met on Tuesdays. No books were required. The subject was the meaning of life. It was taught from experience. The teaching goes on. Dear reader, it has been 10 years since this book was published, and on the occasion of that anniversary, I've been asked to add a few reflections. That is no small task. The book changed my life, and if I am to believe readers around the world, changed the lives of others as well. Where do I begin? Perhaps with an incident that I didn't include in the original manuscript. I meant to, but for some reason I left it out. So here it is, all these years later. When I first phoned Morrie Ch, my old professor, who at this point was in the terrible grip of ALS, I felt I needed to reintroduce myself. After all, it had been 16 years since we had spoken. Would he even remember my name? Back in college, I used to call Morrie Coach. Who knows why? A sports thing even then, I guess. Hi, Coach. How you doing, Coach? Anyway, that day on the phone, when I heard him say hello, I swallowed and said, Morrie, my name is Mitch Album. I was a student of yours in the 1970s. I don't know if you remember me. And this is the first thing he said. How come you didn't call me Coach? My journey began with that sentence. It took me through that phone call, through my first guilt-laden visit to West Newton, through all the Tuesday visits that followed, through Morrie's slow, agonizing decay and his quiet, dignified death. It took me through his funeral, through my private mourning, through the days in my basement writing the pages you have here, through the small initial printing of this book, and through the unexpected 200 printings that have followed. It took me through this country, through many other countries, through seeing this book taught in schools and read at weddings and funerals. It took me through thousands upon thousands of letters and emails and comments and teary hugs from strangers, all of which could be summed up the same way. Your story moved us. But it was not my story. It was Morrie's story. Morrie's invitation. Morrie's last class. I was the invited party. How come you didn't call me Coach? I forgot. He remembered. And that was the difference between us. Morrie has changed me in that way. I remember everything now. How can I not? I'm asked about my old professor almost every day of my life, and I often joke that this book is his revenge for my ignoring him for all those years. I am now his eternal graduate student, coming back every fall, spring, and summer for the same class over and over. That's okay. I always felt Morrie had something to teach. I felt it 30 years ago when he had sideburns and wore yellow turtlenecks and gestured wildly with his hands in front of a classroom, and I felt it years later after the awful disease left him frail and motionless on a lounge chair in his home, his voice a whisper, his body so weak I needed to turn his head just so he could see me. Then, as before, he was wise and loving, and he proved, as he once hoped he would be, a teacher to the end. As proof, when I began thinking about this afterward, I went back to my notes from our conversations together. I had transcribed all the tapes and organized them into subjects. As I meandered through, hearing Morrie's voice again, I wondered if I would happen upon something that would ring a new chime, something I could share here that would make fresh sense given all that has happened. And I came upon this subject, life after death. Now, Morrie, by his own admission, had been an agnostic for many years, but after his diagnosis of ALS, he began to explore, to rethink. He delved into religious teachings. On a Tuesday in August 1995, according to my notes, we spoke about this. Morrie told me he once believed that death was cold and final. You go in the ground and that's it. But now he felt differently. What is your concept now? I asked. I have not settled on one yet, he said, honest as always. However, this is too harmonious, grand, and overwhelming a universe to believe that it's all an accident. What a thing for a one-time agnostic to say. Too harmonious, grand, and overwhelming a universe to believe that it's all an accident? This, remember, was when Morrie's body was an empty husk, when he needed to be washed and groomed, when he needed his nose blown and his bottom wiped. Harmonious? Grand? If he could find the world's majesty from such a decayed and difficult posture, how hard could it be for the rest of us? People often ask what I miss about Morrie. I miss that belief in humanity. I miss the eyes that could view life so encouragingly, and I miss his laugh. I really do. The same day that Morrie spoke of life after death, he shared his reincarnation wish, saying that if he could come back as anything, he'd like to be a gazelle. In rereading the transcripts, I see that I made a wisecraft after he said that. The good news is you'd be reincarnated, I said. The bad news is you'd be in the desert somewhere. And he said right, and he cracked up. We laughed a lot that way. Maybe it's hard to believe with death hovering in the corner, but we did. Nobody liked to laugh more than Morrie. Nobody could milk a corny joke longer. I'm telling you, there were days when I could do a knock-knock joke and he'd go to pieces. So I miss that. And his patience, and his academic references, and his love of food, and the way he closed his eyes when he listened to music. Still, what I miss most, and maybe selfish as it seems, is the twinkle in Morrie's eyes when I came in the room. But when someone is happy, genuinely happy to see you, it melts you from the start. It is like going home. Those Tuesdays when I entered his study with a hibiscus plant by the window, whatever I dragged in with me, personal drama, work issues, burdensome thoughts, it was all washed away when Morrie greeted me because he truly wanted to be with me. His eyes crinkled and his ears pulled up and his mouth made that funny crooked tooth smile, and I was welcome. Others have told me they felt the same way with Morrie. Perhaps his ravaging disease stripped him of distractions, erased the kind of preoccupation with daily details that absorbed the rest of us, allowed him to be fully present. Perhaps he just cherished his time more. I don't know. All I know is those Tuesdays we spent together felt like one long hug from a man who couldn't move his arms. I miss that most of all. In the 10 years since this book was published, I've been asked countless times if I expected it to become so widely read. My answer is usually a head shake, a smile, and a not in a million years. The truth is, the book initially had a hard time finding a home. Numerous publishers were uninterested in it. One even told me I had no idea what a memoir was. Under other circumstances, I might have given up on the idea. The reason I did not, and the reason I believe the book found a place in people's hearts, was because I wasn't trying to write a popular book. I was trying to help Morrie pay his medical bills. As such, I was more dogged and less deterred. I kept going until I found a publisher, and when I told Morrie that I had, and that we could pay his bills, he cried. I often say for me that was the end of Tuesdays with Morrie, even though I had barely begun writing it. I had done what I wanted, one small act of kindness in return for the countless acts he had shown me. But the journey in truth had hardly started. Since then, the book has been published in dozens of countries I have never visited and translated into numerous languages I cannot read or speak. It was adapted into a TV movie, and the great Jack Lemmon told me that Morrie was his favorite role. A stage play was written and performed in theaters across the continent. School systems, universities, funeral homes, hospices, churches, synagogues, book groups, and charities have embraced the book. I can never put into words how humbled I am by all this and how proud I am for Morrie that his gentle wisdom is settling like a snowfall on various streets around the world. It certainly has made me agree with his sentiment. The universe is indeed too grand and harmonious to believe it's all an accident. So I hope this book keeps opening eyes about ALS until we wipe out the disease. And I hope this book keeps reminding people how precious our time with one another is. And I hope it always celebrates teachers, our most precious resource. And I hope, wherever Morrie is now, he is dancing, because he deserves to do that again. When I asked him on that day for a perfect afterlife scenario, this is what he chose. That my consciousness goes on, that I'm part of the universe. I think about all the people who have read this book and all those who still will, and I believe with enormous gratitude that Morrie's wish came true.